Hello and welcome everybody, this is Roland Hartmann from graphicinmotion.com and it is tutorial time again. In this tutorial I will show you how to create this little 3D scene that you see here. We will create a landscape, use some 3D deformation, add some trees and clouds, and we will of course do everything inside Stardust and After Effects, so no 3D application is required to achieve the look that you see right here. Okay, let's jump right into After Effects. If you do not have Stardust already installed on your system, then I would recommend that you jump over to their website, which is superluminal.tv. There you can get Stardust and you can of course also download a free trial version. In After Effects, let's create a new composition and let's call this landscape. And I will use a preset here and I will use this HDTV 1080-25 preset and the duration is 250 frames. And inside this composition I will create a new solid and call this Stardust. And to this solid I will add the Stardust effect. And by default Stardust creates an emitter node and a particle node. Let me zoom in here a little bit. And actually we do not need these right now because I just want to use a 3D geometry. And in the later versions of Stardust you can do this by just selecting a model node. In earlier versions you had to create an emitter and a particle node and a model node, but right now in the newer versions you only need to create a model node and that's fine. With this model node now I can specify the kind of model I want to use, and actually I want to use a primitive and I want to use a plane. So I cannot see anything right now, and this is because the size is very small. So let's increase the size of this plane to 1500 times 1500. And let's also increase the segments a little bit. So let's say we need something like 64 times 64 segments. Okay, and I want my plane to be flat in my scene, so I will just rotate this. So let's take the model properties here. And let's change the angle on the x-axis to -90. And now we can start to deform this plane, and therefore I will use a deform node and add it and link it to my model node. If you take a look at the deform node settings, first of all you can specify a type, and right now it's set to noise. And if I increase the position right now, so let me take a look here what this does, and you see now it is deforming my mesh based on a noise. And if I change the scale here of the noise to something bigger, then you see we get something like sand dunes or like these hills. Let me quickly add a new light here in the scene so that we have some shading. I will use a parallel light for now. And you see then it looks a little bit more interesting, and you can see a little bit better what's going on when a light is in the scene. Actually, let me add a second light to make this even better. So let's bring this to our background. Like so. Okay, now I have my two lights in the scene. And you see, I already got something that is a bit interesting. So something like sand dunes, as I said. And if we change the custom view, then you can see this a bit better what's going on here. But actually, I do not want to deform the mesh based on a noise. I want to deform the mesh with a map. Now let me quickly increase the radius, the fall off distance of these lights here so that I have a bit more light in my scene. Okay, now let's move back to Stardust and let's take a look how we can do this to create a map. First of all, I have to change the deform type to map. And now I need a layer that will function as my map. And therefore I create a new composition and I will call this my deform map. And I will make sure that this is 1000 1500 times 1500 pixels wide. And this is the same size as my plane here actually. So let's create this new composition. Inside my deform map, I will create a new layer and call this ramp. And now I will apply a gradient ramp. Let's make this ramp radial. And let's bring this one here to the middle. And let's swap the colors for now and maybe make it a little bit smaller, like so. So if we move to our landscape now and bring in this deform map, just drag it into your scene and make it invisible. And in Stardust now, in the deform node, specify this layer as a map. And now you see what's happening. Now I've got this little hill here in the middle of my plane. And this is exactly how I will build my landscape now. So let's keep working on this deform map, and therefore I will just lock my composition right here that we see what we are doing, so the result. And I will just open the landscape in a new composition, okay, and I will drag this to the side here that we have both visible here. So this is my map and this is the result that the map is creating. Now inside my deform map, I want to make this a little bit more interesting. So let me first of all add a turbulent displace to my gradient, that we get rid of this circular shape and that it becomes a little bit more like a mountain. You see what this does? I can now increase the amount here a bit and create a nice base form of my mountain. So this looks already quite good. Now to make this even more interesting, I will add a new solid here and I will call this cell pattern. And on this layer, I will add the effect cell pattern. And if I add this, you see what this does. It creates some crazy deformations. And I do not want to use it as it is. I want to change it a bit. So let's change it from bubbles, first of all, to plates. And now I want to make sure that this is only visible inside my ramp. So I will apply an effect that is called set matte. And with the set matte effect, now I can specify what should be used as a matte. And actually I want to use the ramp. And I want to use the effects and masks. And I want to use the luminance. And now you see that the cell pattern is only visible inside the bright areas of my ramp. And you also see that this cell pattern now creates a little bit of deformation on my hill here, on my mountain, and makes it a bit more interesting. So now I can change the evolution a little bit to get something that I like, maybe something like that. You can of course also animate this as I did in my example. And if the influence of the cell pattern is too much, then you can always reduce the opacity. So maybe let's set this to 50 for now. So it has still an influence, but not that much. So let's do something like this for now. Okay, that looks quite good. Now I want to add some hills around my mountain in the middle. So therefore I will just duplicate my cell pattern layer here, duplicate this, move it on the bottom here. And now it is of course not visible because the ramp is covering it, and I will just set the ramp to screen. And on this layer I will delete the set matte. And now I have this cell pattern visible here. But of course I will reduce the opacity that it's not so harsh. So let's reduce it to maybe something like 10%, 15%, depending on how high you want these mountains to be. Maybe I increase this a bit, so let's say 15. Okay, and I could now come in here and change the size here. Maybe it's a little bit too small, so I will just increase the size of this pattern here to something like that. And now we have a nice landscape and we have a nice mountain in the middle. So let's move back to our landscape composition. Let's close this composition window here. Let's work with this one. What I can do to increase or to improve the look here, I wanted to use this really like low poly look, and I can do this by going into my model node, and there is this option to smooth the angle threshold. And if I reduce this to 0, you will see what this does. This really creates this kind of a low poly look. So this is similar to the Fong tag in Cinema 4D, if you're familiar with that one. And to increase the deformation a little bit further, we can just go to our Deform node and increase the position here. And now you see that we get a little bit more deformation, and our landscape and our mountain get a little bit higher. So I think that this doesn't look too bad actually. Maybe I go to my deform map and set this to a bit higher value, maybe instead of 15, 20, so that my landscape around is a little bit more obvious. Well, I think that looks quite good, and I already have a nice landscape here. Now I want to apply some colors to this landscape. So to colorize this, I can now use a material, and I will create a material node. Bring this in here. Let me make a little bit more room here. And link this material node directly to the model. And inside this material node, we can now specify a map for the diffuse channel. But of course, I do not have a map right now, so I have to create one. So again, let's duplicate this deform map here inside the project window this time, Control D, and let's call this color map. Could also call it diffuse map. Sorry for the cat noises. Again, she's very bored because I'm sitting here talking to my computer, and yeah, she's complaining. Now I will get rid of the ramp here because I do not need this, and I will also get rid of this one cell pattern here on the bottom. I will just use this one, make sure that the opacity is set to 100, and I will colorize this now using a tint effect. So let's apply a tint effect here, and I can actually also delete this set matte. And with my tint effect I can now specify some colors. So let's go to dark blue here for the blacks, and let's choose this orange for the blues. So I try to recreate the look that I had in my previous example here. And this doesn't look too bad. So let's take a look inside our landscape composition, drag in the color map and make it invisible. Now inside my material node, I will specify this layer as a diffuse texture. And you see that nothing is happening, and this is because the color from particle value is set to 100. And if you reduce this to 0, then our texture will be colorized. If this is set to 100, then the material is looking for a particle node and the color of this particle node, but we have no particle node, so we have to reduce the color from particle to 0, that our diffuse texture is working. And now you see that we have a nice coloring of our landscape. Okay, so far so good. The next step is to create these little trees. And to create the trees, first of all, I want to create a new emitter. And with this emitter, I will of course need a particle node, so that the emitter is doing something. And now we have particles that are emitting, and they are now hidden under our landscape. So let me quickly turn this off, and therefore you can use this newly introduced user interface icons here. You have option to turn model off, you can solo it, and you can hide it in the hierarchy here. You can turn on and off the helpers that are displayed or not, or you can zoom to the node inside the Stardust panel here. So these are these newly introduced user interface icons that you have got. For now, let's turn off our model and let's work on our emitter. So in our emitter, first of all, I want to create a grid, and I want it to only emit once. I want the speed of the particles to be 0, and I want the grid to be 1500 times 1 times 1500. So it will be exactly the same size as my landscape. And now I want to change the grid dimensions a bit. So let's say we want 20 on X, 1 on Y, and 20 on Z. Okay, now if we enable our model again, you see that now these are not behaving like trees. So they're not sitting on the surface of my topography here, of my landscape. So how can we do that? We somehow have to change the position of the particles using the same deformation map that changes the position of the polygons in our plane. And we can do this by using a field node. So let's use a field node, and let's link this field node to our particles. Now inside the field node now we can specify a layer, and with this layer, or a map I should say, we can change the position. And we already have the map that we need, and you see we have the layer here to specify map, and I want to use the deform map. So now I use the deform map, and I do not want this to be a graph, I want it to be a layer. And now I have to tell the field map what it should do. So it should affect the position. It should project this map on the X and Z plane here. And it should apply the axis of the position deformation to Y. And if I now change the offset here, let me quickly do this like so. And you see something is happening, but actually what is happening is that the deformation is moving in the wrong direction, I think. So let's go to effect properties and take a closer look. So I do not want to affect the size, I want to affect the position. And if I increase this, you see, yeah, there is something going on, but it is actually, yeah, doing it in the wrong direction. So what I have to do is I have to invert my map. And therefore I have to create a new map. So let's Control D again, deform map, and let's call this position map. And let's bring this in here to our composition, make it invisible, and enter this position map. And let's now add a new adjustment layer and add an invert object or effect right here to this layer. Now let's go back to the landscape and let's change the map in our field node to this position map here. And now the offset should be right. I have to just change the offset sample here. We take a look. Yeah, you see now it is changing the position in the right direction. It's just a little bit too much. So let me just decrease this value, and I want to eyeball this now so that all the particles more or less sit on my surface. And this looks quite good, like so. And now I can create my trees and make this look a little bit nicer. So maybe I will change the value a bit more. Okay, now I want to create the small trees. And to do that, I will use not standard particles. So I will change the particle shape from circle to model, because I actually want these to be 3D models, but I do not want them to be cubes. I want to use a different kind of model. So I will choose my model type here, and I will just connect this to my particle. And in this model node, I will change this to primitive, and this time I want to use a cylinder. And actually they're a little bit too big, so let me change, first of all, the life here to 10 seconds. That's important inside the particle node. And let me change the size to something like 5, that they are a bit smaller. Maybe this is too small, 6. Yeah, that looks quite good. And now let's create these small trees, and we can do that by using a replica node. So let's add a replica node and let's link it to our model node. And now I want to use an offset, and I want to offset on the y-axis. So let's type in here a value of -5 for now. And now let's increase the offset to 4. And actually nothing is happening. And this is because I have to connect it to my particles, sorry. So connect it to the particles and not to my model node. So let me just delete this connection, and now you see that the replica is working. So I bring it over here, and I have this replica, and now you see that I have 4 instances of my cylinders here. Now I want to make them smaller as they are offset, and I can do this by changing the size along the path. So let's go to these along path properties, and let's change the size here. I will use a preset here, and I will use this preset, the fade out Bezier 2. And you see what's happening now. Now I have these small trees already, but I want to make this a little bit smoother. And I also do not want the last one to be at 0. So I just smooth out this curve a little bit so that we get something that looks like a tree. Now in the replica node, maybe I will reduce the offset to a smaller value, -3. This looks quite good. And I think that my trees are quite nice, but they are too regular, they are too many. So to change this, I will go to my particle settings. And inside my particle settings, there is this birth chance here, and I can reduce the birth chance to, let's say, maybe a value of 40. And now you see we have scattered these trees a little bit more. Now I want to colorize my trees, and to colorize my trees, I will use a field node again. So let's apply a field node here to my replica node and link it. Okay, and inside this field node now we have to specify that it is a map, and we want to use a layer as a map, and I want to use the color map actually. Then let's specify the effect. It should affect the color, and let's project it on XZ. But the color is not really saturated, so it's kind of grayed out, and we can correct this by adding a material node. So let's add a material node to this model here, and by doing that, you see now my trees take over the color from the surface. And this is exactly what I want. Okay, to make this look a little bit better, let me first of all increase the intensity of my lights a bit. So I will just turn this on to make it a little bit brighter, like so. And I could also colorize these lights a bit, just to create a bit of a nicer look. So let's make this classic warm and cold light thing. Okay. And now we will take a look at a very interesting feature, and this is shadows in Stardust. If we select Stardust and move to the top section here, Stardust settings, and there are the render settings, I have the option to include shadows. Now let's turn on the shadows and let's take a look what this does. And you see immediately I get shadows all over the place. This is because my lights that I have in the scene are now creating shadows. And you see that this makes it look really realistic and really cool. So not only my small trees are creating shadows on the surface, also the surface itself. So these canyons here, these valleys now are filled with shadows. And you can control the shadows right here. So you can change the threshold here. And if I reduce this, you will see what this does. So the smaller the threshold, then more shadows I will get. And I can, of course, reverse this in the other direction to reduce the amount of shadows that I get. I think that the 100 value here is right. And you can, of course, also change the softness. So I can really make these shadows very soft. And you see that this also changes the look here quite a bit. So let's reduce this again, maybe to something like 200, that they are a little bit softer. And the quality of the shadows, if you take a look here, is also influenced by the quality settings that we have in the render settings. So if I set this now to extreme, let's take a look here at this area, and it becomes really smooth. So you can specify the quality of the rendering and of the shadows using these quality settings here. And if the scene is complex and you want to save some resources on your system, then you can set it to medium while working and then set it to a higher value when rendering. For now, I will just leave it on high. You can also control the shadow by the lights, of course. So right now, both of my lights are creating shadows. And if I do not want this, so maybe I do not want this backlight here to create any shadows, then I can just turn off the cast shadows in this light. And I can also change the shadow darkness in my light settings here. If I change the shadow darkness here, you see that my shadows now are brighter and not so obvious. So let's set this to maybe 75%, and now I have really nice shadows. Another option to create shadows in Stardust is to use the ambient occlusion. So if I open this up and turn on ambient occlusion, you will see what this does. This adds some kind of self-shadowing. Now, yeah, I have in all these bends here and all these edges, I have some shadows. So take a look at these trees here, and if I turn this off, you see what ambient occlusion does. In this case, I think that I do not need any ambient occlusion. I think that the shadow alone really creates a nice and realistic look. Okay, you see, so I have got a pretty interesting look here in my scene, and I can improve this now by adding a few clouds. So to add a few clouds, let me create another emitter, and I will I will just duplicate this emitter because I want the same settings. So just Ctrl D, duplicate this emitter here. Oops. And just use this new one. I should rename these actually, and should name this cloud emitter and this trees and so on. But yeah, a little bit too lazy for that now. So let's create a new particle node and let's add it to our emitter. And inside these particles now, I want to use cloud particles. And actually I also want these to follow the surface here a little bit. So I will duplicate this field node as well. So this is my offset field node. This changes the position of the particles. So let's duplicate this as well. And now you see my cloud particles sit exactly where my tree particles are. And to change the position of my particles so that they are not exactly in the same spot as my trees, I go into my emitter and I just will rise the emitter here so that they are nicely spread throughout my scene. And again, I want to reduce the amount, of course. So let me reduce the birth chance here to a lower value, like 35%. Now let's take a look at these particles and make them look a little bit nicer. So I go to the particle properties. First of all, we can make these 10 seconds long. And in the particle properties, I will use a random color from a gradient, and I will specify a gradient, and I will just use similar colors, a little bit brighter ones though, so like this, and second color will be orange or a little bit of yellow, something like that. Now let's reduce the opacity quite a bit, so I do not want these to be very opaque. So let's reduce this to a very low number, maybe something around 15, and let's increase the random opacity to about 60. Now I want to feather these particles like 75, and I want to randomize the size quite a bit, like so. And I want to change the transfer mode to add. And that's it. Now I have some nice particles. And I have a nice landscape with some trees. And if I want to animate this now, I did not do this until yet, but I will show you this quickly as a last step in this tutorial. If you want to animate this little scene here, you can go to the Deform map now, and you can just animate the evolution here of these cell patterns. I should have done this before actually, because now I would have to go to the position and do the same. But if you do it right in the first step, then you can copy these, and then the animation will be available on all the maps. But just to demonstrate this, how I did the animation, I will go to the cell pattern and I will just add an expression, hold down Alt and click on the stopwatch of the evolution and type in time times 50. And now I can copy this expression and do the same right here. Paste it in. And as I said, now I have to do the same right here. Paste it in. And I have to do the same in my color map. If I should have done this really in the first step when I created the deform map, but it doesn't matter. Now you see that these are all animating. And if I take a look now at my landscape, you see that this is also animating. And the nice thing is that all of these particles, the trees and the clouds, are moving with the deformation of my landscape. Okay, so this is it with this tutorial. I really hope that you learned something and that you are now able to create some nice landscapes inside Stardust. If you have any questions, then feel free to post them in the comments. You can also contact me through my website, which is www.graphicinmotion.com. There you can find all my After Effects templates. You can find a lot of After Effects tutorials, also a lot of Stardust tutorials actually. And you can also find an After Effects basic course. So if you are new to After Effects and want to learn the program, the basics, then I would recommend this free After Effects basic course. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I really hope to see you soon. Goodbye.